I use the phrase reasons for faith. We've defined the kind of faith we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about a belief system or a worldview, but what kind of reason are we going to be using? Well, there's a number of different kinds of reason that you can encounter. One is the idea of deductive reasoning. And this you encounter in logic class. You know, Socrates is a man. No, how does that go? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore what?
Socrates.
He's mortal, therefore he'll die, okay? That's just the application of a general rule to a particular case to get a certain outcome. That's what deductive reasoning does. Another kind of reason is called induction. That's a form of reasoning that scientists often use, and it's the idea that if you make observations of the same kind of phenomenon over and over again, then you draw generalization. So if I drop something like these lovely tennis balls, and I drop one and what? Falls, I say, okay, this an unsupported body fell to the ground. Okay, do it again. Unsupported body number 2 falls to the ground. Number 3 falls to the ground. Hey, I got an idea. Here's my law of gravity. All unsupported bodies fall, okay? Induction, what it does is that you see a number of cases of a particular kind of thing happening, and then you make an inference about that thing always happening under certain conditions, okay? What we're looking at is a bunch of clues, and we're trying to figure out what caused those clues to come into existence. We're going to be looking at some things about the cosmos, about life, about the laws of physics, and we're going to say what caused those peculiar features to be as they are. And this form of reasoning has another name. It's called abduction. It's the kind of reasoning that Sherlock Holmes used and detectives used. And it turns out Charles Darwin used. And it's a typical form of reasoning in science where you're trying to reason from effects back to causes. When we're asking about the prime reality, the thing from which everything else came, we're asking a question about ultimate causation. This is the form of reasoning we're going to be looking at. So here's an illustration of this form of reasoning. We've got a footprint in the ground, right? Only it's on the moon. What can we infer from that? Can we say anything about what caused it? We got an effect. Now we want to reason back to the cause. Yeah, what's your idea?
Something was on the moon?
Yeah, maybe somebody with a boot, right? Okay, maybe an astronaut or something, okay? So, you know, that's the kind of inference, that's an abductive inference, moving from effects back to cause. Now that's a really good way to reason, but there's one real small problem with it. It can be uncertain, okay? Here's another abductive argument. If it rains, the streets will get wet. Anyone disagree with that? Okay, that's just our background knowledge. Now, we go outside, we see, hey, there's water on the streets. What can we infer? Can we infer that it rained?
No.
From the effect? We can't, can we? Why not?
Could have been a fire hydrant or something.
Okay, it might have been a fire hydrant. It might have been, you know, some guys in a dorm firing water balloons. It might have been somebody washed the car. I mean, a lot of other possible causes, all right? So when we're trying to reason from an effect back to a cause using this abductive form of reasoning, sometimes we got to be aware that there may be more than one cause of the same effect. So we've got to look at the other possibilities real carefully before we make any real definitive conclusion, okay? So in order to get around this problem, scientists have developed another method of reasoning. Philosophers use this too, and this is the method that we're going to be using mainly in the class. It's called the method of multiple competing hypotheses, okay? The idea of multiple competing hypotheses is that if you've got an effect that could be explained in a number of different ways, you want to evaluate each one of those hypotheses to see which one best explains the evidence. Let's say one of the hypotheses is the water balloon hypothesis, right? Okay, if you're trying to decide between it rained and water balloons, what are you going to look for?
Plastic from the water balloon?
Yeah, little shrapnel, little rubber shards of water balloons, okay? Also, you'd look for a patch of water or is the water everywhere? Because that's what rain does, right?
Yeah.
But if it's a fire hydrant or maybe somebody washing a car or a water balloon, it's going to be more localized, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to look for other clues to try to adjudicate. Between the different hypotheses to see which one provides the best explanation, okay? So if you get in a place where you got one piece of evidence that can be explained in multiple ways, to get to the place where you can infer the best explanation, sometimes you're going to have to look at more evidence, all right? And we're going to use that method. And we call that method inferring to the best explanation. Okay, any questions?
So when you're talking about the multiple competing hypothesis,
right?
That is not 100% proof either, though.
Exactly.
Either with
That's a great point.
The other ones.
Okay, but notice the source of uncertainty with the abductive form of reasoning was that you had more than one possible cause that could explain the same event. All right? So if you can eliminate that source of uncertainty so that there's only one cause that can explain all the evidence that you're looking at, you're in a much stronger position. In a court of law, they sometimes will talk about beyond reasonable doubt.
Yes.
There's a point where the evidence piles up and there's only one cause that will explain that evidence, and then you're in a position where you can infer it's beyond reasonable doubt, but still not mathematically certain proof like you get in geometry, okay? And that's the way we reason in ordinary life. Nobody gets absolute proof of anything. And in a sense, the God question, the questions of prime reality and ultimate reality are no different. You don't get absolute certainty, but you might have a lot of good reasons to believe one view of ultimate reality over another. And that's what I'm going to argue, that theistic belief is well supported, lots of good evidence, might even provide the best explanation. In fact, I'm going to argue that, but it won't, you still can't prove things absolutely. Because actually, with the exception of geometry, we can prove almost nothing absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so what makes an explanation best? If we're saying that a good form of reasoning is to infer the best explanation. Well, philosophers and scientists who have studied this question have come to a kind of consensus on this. And they think the best explanation is one that provides the most adequate causal explanation. So that's the key criterion we're going to look at. And since we're looking at the question of the prime reality, and that prime reality is essentially a question of ultimate causation. If we say, what's the thing from which everything else came, that's a question about cause, about causality. And so this is the method that we're going to use to investigate that question. And that's where this gets really exciting, because we can apply these common forms of reasoning, this particular common form of reasoning, which is used in science, in law, and in philosophy, we can apply that to this question of what's the thing from which everything else comes. And we can evaluate competing worldviews by reference to this method of reasoning. So if we think of the worldviews we've looked at, materialism or naturalism, deism, pantheism, theism, each of these worldviews invokes a different kind of entity as the thing from which everything else comes. And we can evaluate whether those entities have the causal power to produce the kinds of evidence that we're going to be looking at. Evidence from cosmology, evidence from physics and the laws of physics, evidence from biology. We're going to look at evidence from the natural world and see which one of these big worldviews provides the best explanation of that evidence and some of our ordinary experience as well. So tomorrow, we're going to begin looking at whether or not there are reasons for faith, but I thought it was important before we got going to have a good look at what we mean by reason, what we mean by faith, and what the relationship is between the two. So tomorrow, we'll start looking at evidence, and I think that's going to be really exciting as well.
So what are you willing to do to really prepare yourself to give a reason for your beliefs? At times, this series is going to feel like a lot of work. It was designed on purpose to be challenging. But whether you're planning on attending college or entering the workforce, the challenge waiting for you is an aggressive opposition set on trivializing your belief in God. The Apostle Peter said to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give a reason for the hope that you have. Are you willing and able to do that?